The NHS is in trouble, and Palantir is the only software company in the world that I believe can solve their problems. I did not know about the NHS for the majority of my life until I became a Palantir investor. And when I started digging deep into them, I realized that 67 million people across the United Kingdom depend on one entity to deliver their healthcare. And while that may sound amazing in theory, because essentially the aim is that no matter who you are or whatever socioeconomic status you come from, you will have access to proper healthcare, the actual practical implementation of a system at that scale to be efficient and effective and non-bureaucratic has simply been non-existent for the past 20 years. And this is not me saying it as an American. This is me looking at many Twitter comments and many YouTube comments of people in the United Kingdom basically telling me the NHS, for lack of a better word, is a crapshoot and they need an overhaul. The NHS has spent over $10 billion over the past 2 decades trying to rebuild their IT infrastructure to make it as effective as possible for people to not have the massive levels of wait times or backlogs that hospitals have. But unfortunately, nothing has saved them. I believe Palantir is the only company in the world that can solve it, and in this video, there are going to be a lot of updates you want to pay attention to as we discuss this deal. Now, before I get into some of the major updates, it's important for Palantir to get this deal. Not only is it $550 million for 5 years, which would be something north of $100 million per year in top-line revenue if Palantir gets this deal with the 2-year extension, the implications for one company to control the entire infrastructure of healthcare for the United Kingdom and do it effectively, meaning they can actually show results and people in the UK don't hate going to the doctor or setting up an appointment, that would be massive. I mean, forget the money, the idea that the brand name of Palantir is associated with proper distribution of healthcare, which is essentially life or death for people, right? Like, this is why healthcare is such an important idea, especially when it comes to just the ability for a company to grow, because there's so many different sectors that the company can implement itself in. It's a really big deal. And I would imagine other socialized healthcare systems across the world that are inefficient would be like, hey, if you can do it for 70 million people in the UK, you can do it for our 20 to 30 million people. Let's get a deal done. Let's actually discuss what can be done. Now, first update, Facebook. So this is a reason why you need Palantir. NHS data breach, trust shared patient details with Facebook without consent. When the article says trust, it just means individual hospitals. That's what they're called in the United Kingdom. NHS trusts are sharing intimate details about patients' medical conditions, appointments, and treatments with Facebook without consent and despite promising never to do so. An observer investigation has uncovered a covert tracking tool on the website of 20 NHS hospitals, which has for years collected browsing information and shared it with a tech giant in a major breach of privacy. The data includes granular details of pages viewed, buttons clicked, and keyword search. It is matched with the user's IP address and identifier linked to an individual or household, and in many cases, details of their Facebook account. So essentially 20 NHS hospitals have this type of cookie or like crawler inside of their website, and it was gathering all of this data that was being done. Information extracted by a metapixel, which is essentially Facebook's way of being able to implement an understanding of data for a website. So for example, if you start a Shopify website or any type of website that sells something, you get a Facebook pixel, which is a certain line of code. You attach it to your website, and then when people come to that website, the Facebook pixel can understand the demographics of who they are. And then when you do advertising, it can retarget in a very effective way with lookalike audiences. As you can see, I did some Facebook advertising before in the past based on this pixel. So this pixel is very valuable for Facebook. Meta, for its own business purposes, including improving its targeted advertising service, used this pixel. Records of information sent by the firm by NHS websites reveals it includes data which, linked to an individual, could receive personal medical details. It was collected from patients who visited hundreds of NHS web pages about HIV, self-harm, gender identity, sexual health, etc. It also includes details of when web users click buttons to book an appointment, order a repeat prescription, request a referral to complete an online counseling course, and millions of patients are potentially affected. This weekend, 17 of 20 of the NHS trusts that were using the metapixel confirmed they had pulled the tracking tool from their websites, and now they are apologizing for this. Before we get any further into some of the updates, why is this a big deal? Because this is why you need Palantir. One of the core elements of Palantir, which is the whole ironic thing about the propaganda that exists in the United Kingdom of them, misusing patient data, is you've got a company like Facebook that is inadvertently getting all of this data, improving their advertising services. So for example, if you typed in a therapy on an NHS website, the keyword of that is indexed, attached to the metapixel, and then these Facebook, the pixels are incredibly strong when they come to advertising, and you get a company like BetterHelp, which is like a telemedicine for therapy. They know who to target because you searched for therapy and you searched for it on a website that is dedicated to these types of services in the context of the NHS. And then boom, you get an advertisement. and you're potentially more likely to buy. The idea that these hospitals have their information leaked and that sensitive patient data at the tune of millions were then manipulated and exploited and essentially monetized for attention is exactly what Palantir has been critiquing. And the problem is the propaganda that exists in the United Kingdom thinks that Palantir would do something like that when Palantir does not monetize data, they don't spy on people, and they don't collect that data in order to sell it to any type of third-party advertisers. Their entire business model is giving you the picks and shovels so you can use that data and make it more effective. And when we introduce LLMs into hospitals, which is going to happen all across the NHS as the world gets more digitized, the securitization of those large language models to be trained on proprietary data can only be done with a company that knows how to securely process that data. And to me, I just don't know what other company in the world out there exists, because if they did exist, they would have fixed the NHS a long time ago, other than Palantir. Remember, Palantir got a 2-year contract with the NHS back in December 2020 for vaccine distribution, and they did a phenomenal job just in terms of being able to set up the infrastructure. So in general, it does seem like Palantir has already shown they can have the effects to get the job done. And obviously, when you've got companies like Facebook exploiting data, it's not going to be effective for them to do. It's for the NHS to use any other company. Now, here's another big deal. Tech giant Palantir to cut scores of jobs in London. NHS is in London. Peter Thiel's company is consulting on proposals to slash as many as 75 jobs from the capital. That would represent a cut of just over 8% of its UK workforce, based on staffing numbers disclosed by the firm. Palantir declined to comment. It follows an earlier round of cuts announced by the business in February, in which it laid off 2% of its global workforce. The firm previously said, "We believe our company is at an inflection point, and to continue to evolve, we are making the tough choice of reducing teams in several areas. These are incredibly painful decisions, but the right ones for a company's future." Now, the question becomes, why is Palantir doing this? I think there's two ways to think about this. Number one is the more cynical way. Palantir is not getting the NHS deal, and as a result, they're understaffing because they know they're not getting the NHS deal, and they're cutting 75 jobs. The NHS is in the UK. Palantir is one of Palantir's largest offices is in the UK, so if they're not getting a job that's primarily built for UK citizens, why would they need that many UK employees? So they're getting rid of some jobs. That's one way to think of it. I just think that's a very elementary analysis. Another sort of way to think about it is, well, Palantir might have already gotten the deal. They've figured out what jobs they do need, what jobs they don't need, and as a result, they're undercutting in areas they don't need in order to remain capital efficient so that they can achieve GAAP profitability. I mean, Alex Karp has said every single quarter this year they're going to become profitable. If revenue growth is not as high as you need it to be, which they guided that revenue growth was going to be essentially 0 to 2% growth quarter over quarter from Q1 to Q2 in 2023, then you've got to get rid of some expenses. And you've got to get rid of some expenses, you've got to get rid of some jobs. One could imagine these jobs are not the most crucial jobs in order for them to survive in the UK. Again, they already have a very big presence in the United Kingdom, and I have some videos coming up in the future of when they're actually talking to people in the UK, and we have some documented footage of like how they're engaging with actual, people that run different governmental agencies in the UK. So I don't think it's a question of them not getting the NHS deal. I think it's more so a question of them doubling down on the jobs that matter, or they already got the NHS deal or have an understanding that they have the NHS deal, so they were able to effectively be like, okay, we don't need these people because we know we got the deal. We need a bunch of these people. We might have to start hiring for different types of roles. So let's get this over with. Let's move on. And let's get rid of some of the jobs. And so that's one of the second updates that we have to understand when it comes to what's going on in the NHS. Now, here's an article we got a couple of days ago saying that NHS England says all NHS trusts and ICSs to get an FDP instance. An FDP is the Federated Data Platform. Now, what I found interesting here was this part as we read through it. The information appears to conflict with an answer to parliamentary consensus to the Department of Health, tabled on March 7th, that found 11 trusts have paused or suspended pilots of Foundry, which is obviously Palantir software, the current analytics platform, which has so formed the basis of the FTP. Now, notice this here before we go any further. 7 out of 11 trusts, 11 hospitals have decided to pause or suspend their pilot programs of Foundry. A couple months ago, it was told that the NHS has informed all of the England trusts, all of the England hospitals, to decide to start moving their data into Foundry. On March 7th, 11 of them have decided to suspend using Foundry. But the other thing that it says is that it is the current analytics platform which has formed the basis for the FDP, which means The entire operating system for this new federated data platform has been monopolized essentially by Palantir's Foundry. And even if 11 hospitals have stopped working with it, and for what reasons, we don't know. Maybe it's a pause, maybe it's a suspension, maybe they're using something else. We'll find out in the future. It is the only analytics platform it seems to have been used for Palantir. The competitors, which is this consortium of clients that were working to go against Palantir, this was released in April, that 3 to 5 companies were going to challenge Palantir for this $550 million contract. They've given up. An article came out late April saying they have taken out their bid because they realized they couldn't compete with Palantir. In fact, someone messaged me on Twitter whose dad works for one of those competitors and told us he even thinks there's no chance they're going to beat Palantir because they're just that much better, which makes sense. I mean, Palantir has software that is just highly technologically advanced compared to any other legacy IT company. And so all of those are gone. So I believe the pause or suspension is just temporary and eventually they'll get back to it because there is no other federated data platform they can use outside of Foundry, but they might have paused it just because they're not sure exactly how to use it right now. A media spokesman for the NHS wrote in a comment that the FDP procurement is designed to help NHS England and NHS England make the most of the information they hold to work together to understand patterns, solve problems, and plan services for their local populations. Again, this is going to be a $550 million deal. The NHS spokesman said that NHS England are conducting a fair and transparent procurement in line with the public contract regulations of 2015. A preferred supplier will not be selected until the competition has been completed. But Smith said that the trust obligations were not in the public tender, they were not in the public information, and so they aren't in the phase 1 budget that's been announced, which means those trusts that suspended the use of Foundry haven't been even included in the overall budget that the NHS is going to give to all of those different trusts. He added, it seems that the NHS England will make the budget work by picking Palantir and making the trust pay for it. A loss leader contract with balloon payments is what got NHS hooked in the first place. So we still don't know exactly how this is going to get done, but essentially one of the ways that this gets done might be that the NHS forces the individual hospitals to pay for their version of Foundry while having an overarching system that is going to be able to control the federated data platform. And that's what's going to allow the flow of hospitals being able to use Foundry. Or it might be that the platform is going to be given to all hospitals. They're going to have to put their data. They might have to pay some fee, even if they're not paying the entire fee. But that's what's going to allow them to be able to afford the cost of Foundry at the end of the day as they give out all these different individual instances of Foundry to different trusts. I am not sure exactly how this is going to work out. What I am sort of starting to get familiar with is that it doesn't seem like there's any other operating system other than Palantir's Foundry that is doing anything for hospitals in the UK, that is doing anything for trust. There is legacy IT software that is not working. This is why the NHS a year ago decided to start going on this journey. I mean, this was announced back in June of 2022 that we were going to introduce a 360 million pound contract, and now that's up to 550 million or 480 million pounds because the NHS realized that we can't be inefficient, we can't be ineffective. And as a result of that, they're doing something different. Now, whether these hospitals are going to suspend Palantir's Foundry for a little bit until they get more clarity or until they have to realize they have to pay, or what the NHS is going to do with the overall payment of all these systems, I'm not sure exactly what's going to happen. What I am sure of is that it just doesn't seem, from all the research I'm doing into this deal, because again, this deal has massive implications for Palantir, that there's any other company that is going to get this done. All of these things that we're dealing with right now are the logistical issues that it takes to get a deal of this magnitude distributed across hundreds of hospitals across an entire country. And it's bound to happen. You're bound to have some of these hiccups. I mean, for goodness sakes, Palantir was going to debate Foxglove at one point in March until I think the NHS called them and said, hey, you don't need to do that. You're going to get this deal. We don't need to make a public spectacle of this, because Palantir was ready to make a public spectacle. They were ready to do the debate, and I was excited. I got my popcorn ready, but then they backed down because they probably were like, all right, we don't need to do this. So these are all the little things that have to get done before you get a deal. There's going to be a ton of little things that happen, but I do think that the deal is going to get done. And one of the other reasons I think the deal is going to get done is because Rishi Sunak, the new prime minister of the UK, has basically been saying one of his top 5 agendas is to get the NHS fixed. Here's him talking exactly about Palantir. And this is on Adam Bergman's channel. I'll leave his link in the description. Definitely recommend checking him out. He's a great Palantir YouTuber as well.
You know, part of it actually is having more data and technology around management of your backlog in its entirety is clearly an obviously good thing to do. And again, it's kind of what I was saying before. It sounds kind of obvious. Okay, we should use some technology to help us analyze our waiting list and then organize ourselves in the most optimal way. That doesn't actually happen everywhere, right? I mean, and that's part of our job, is to spread that best practice. There's a couple of different systems, you know, Foundry is another one. There are a few different systems that do a really good job of exactly what you're saying. Chelsea and Westminster is another trust which used some IT, which made a 28%, almost a third reduction in their backlog just by organising for them. It was cleaning through their list, then organising their theatre. All of you, the nurses who have to work in theatres, there's like optimising your theatre list on a day-to-day basis, managing the cancellations. Right? That is so important. And again, the technology can really help us do that.
So right there, you've got the Prime Minister of the UK who is pro-technology talking about these issues. This is a quote from the article that reported this back in February 2022. So far, the solution has enabled a 28% reduction, that's what Rishi was talking about, in the inpatient waiting list through validation and better clinical oversight. Booking lead times have almost tripled from 6 to 17 plus days on average, meaning that patients can be notified to come for surgery in a more timely manner, reducing the number of cancellations due to the lack of staff or patient availability. Over the past 3-month period, theater utilization has improved from 73% to 86%, which is also what Rishi was talking about as well. Additionally, representatives from other trusts have described their experiences co-building with Palantir, including Kara Williams, Chief Digital Information Officer at the Countess of Chester Hospital. In terms of our inpatient waiting list, we've had a 23% impact on that. The platform has been a real success in helping to clean up our waiting list and ensuring that the data is as clean as it could be, and that's all in preparation for theater utilization and making sure we're making the best use of our theater space. And then this article I'll put in the description also goes into how Palantir's software is building out a better, effective way for patients who have cancer or who could have cancer to be diagnosed way quicker than they are currently being diagnosed in the current state of the NHS. This is a big deal. This is a very, very big deal. This is going to be one of those contracts that when Palantir gets, I believe, will be one of the many inflection points as we're getting into the new world of AI. And this is why it's so exciting, because you've got all these catalysts from this perspective, but then you've got an entire country's healthcare system potentially relying on one single vendor that I believe has already been picked, and a lot of this has just not been announced yet because the NHS is picking the right way again to resolve all these inefficiencies we talked about throughout the video to be able to fully roll it out. But what other company has been reducing backlogs by 28%? Like, what other company is doing that? And if you can name the company, I'd be happy to do some research into them. But all the companies, all the competitors I've done research to be able to get this deal, they've not been able to put up the numbers. And if you're not able to put up the numbers, it's very hard for me to take you seriously in terms of competing for a very, very big contract. And if the NHS wants to use legacy IT companies again, that they've already wasted $10 billion for in the past 10 years to be able to get the job done, be my guest. But it doesn't seem like Rishi, that new UK Prime Minister, wants to go down that path. I mean, the way he's talking, he's like a technologist. He's talking like a guy that's like, yeah, obviously, if we have massive amounts of data, we should implement that into some type of system to be able to make it more effective. And so I, as a Prime Minister, look good because you guys elected me to change stuff, and I'm changing the amount of time you wait to be able to get an appointment. I think we should use technology systems to get that job done. Like when you've got that type of culture leading the UK, essentially having to make these hard decisions, I think it's going to be very hard for Palantir to miss out on this deal. So, not to mention, we also hired the head of AI and digital strategy at the NHS, Indra Joshi, who followed me on Twitter the other day. That was pretty cool. As one of our chief operators inside of Palantir's actual entire company, right? So we took them from the NHS, likely to help lobby the NHS, but also to get a better understanding of what the NHS wants from a political perspective and a technological perspective. And we put them in front of Palantir. And I just think no other company has been able to do that for some of the head officials at the NHS to then be able to bring them into our ecosystem and figure out how we can reverse engineer it, be able to get this deal and ultimately help the entire United Kingdom. So those are my thoughts. I think we're going to get this deal. It's going to take some time to see it come through, but I don't see any competitors in the way. And again, outside of the money, the implications of Palantir controlling the entire operating system for a country's healthcare, to me, is profound and massive, and we'll see what happens as a result of that. Thank you so much for listening and watching. Twitter in the description. Please follow me there. I'll see you guys in the next one.